Welcome to today's explainer. If you've ever walked past a homeless shelter, a busy public plaza, or even a college campus, you've probably seen them. Small, pocket-sized testaments being handed out for free. But a really fascinating analysis by Denzel Kenobi titled The Curated Word asks us to look a little closer at these ubiquitous little books, and more importantly, to look at what has been left out.
Right on the cover or in the opening pages of these pocket testaments, there's this striking irony. You'll often find a quote from Proverbs 36, which directly commands the reader, "Add thou not unto his words, lest he reprove thee, and thou be found a liar." It's a stark, absolute warning against diminishing or altering the text. Yet, the person receiving it is holding this massive indictment in a book that has itself been heavily diminished. They literally hold the warning in their hand, but they have absolutely no way to know it.
Which brings us to a pretty staggering question. What actually happens when a book handed to the most vulnerable among us is missing exactly 39 parts? Because if you open one of these standard handouts, you'll usually find the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs, and absolutely nothing else. That is a massive foundational gap. Section 1. The Book in the Hand. 39 missing pieces. Just think about the sheer volume of what has been removed here. There's no Genesis or Exodus. The entirety of the law and history, Joshua, Kings, gone. The major prophets who demanded justice, like Isaiah and Jeremiah, completely excised. Even the minor prophets like Amos and Habakkuk are missing. 39 books are cut, leaving only 2 from the Hebrew Scriptures, Psalms and Proverbs. Someone, somewhere, made a highly specific editorial decision to take these exact texts out of the hands of the vulnerable.
Let's move to Section 2, Marcion's Ancient Cut, a 2nd century precedent.
To really understand why this matters today, we actually have to rewind all the way back to a wealthy 2nd century shipowner named Marcion of Sinope. Marcion arrived in Rome in the late 130s AD with a lot of money and a very radical doctrine. He believed the God of the Hebrew Scriptures, the God of the land, covenant, and judgment, was an inferior deity, totally distinct from the New Testament Father. So Marcion created the first fixed Christian canon in history by essentially taking a pair of scissors to it. He physically severed the entire Old Testament and purged the Jewish roots from the text that remained.
Section 3. The Interpretive Transfer. Outliving the Argument. Now, the early church swiftly excommunicated Marcion and kept the Hebrew books on the shelf. But over the next 4 centuries, they slowly adopted his premise in a slightly different way. If we track this historical progression, early on the Epistle of Barnabas argued the covenant was forfeited entirely at Sinai. By 155 AD, Justin Martyr framed material laws as punishments. Later, Origen reduced the literal law to just a spiritual husk. And by 426 AD, Augustine cemented the idea that Hebrew texts were just preserved as a witness, not something to actually be lived out. That's 4 centuries and one incredibly clear direction of travel.
So the physical books remained on the shelf, right? But their real-world covenant was carried off them. This is what Kenobi calls the interpretive transfer. Marcion lost the battle over the table of contents, for sure, but he kind of won the interpretation. And this ancient shift set the psychological stage for the modern printing press. After all, if laws about land, debt, and property are just metaphors anyway, it's remarkably easy to just delete them when the printing estimate arrives.
Section 4. Hotels versus the sidewalk. The Valence Asymmetry. Fast forward to today. When we analyze massive distribution efforts, there is a documented systemic contrast at play, what the analysis calls a valence asymmetry. If you're in a paid hotel room, you get the complete canon in the drawer, Genesis all the way to Revelation. But if you're on the sidewalk, in a shelter, or in jail, you receive the abridged version. The full word sits where money is spent, while the drastically edited word goes straight to the marginalized.
And the anatomy of this cut is incredibly revealing. Consider what's retained versus what's removed. We keep Psalms for personal consolation and Proverbs for personal morality and good behavior. But what's actively removed? Exodus, literally the story of God delivering people from forced labor. Leviticus 25, the Jubilee year requiring the release of debts and the return of alienated land. Amos and Isaiah, prophets who fiercely indicted those profiting off the poor. Consolation and personal morality are retained. Deliverance, restitution, and systemic justice are completely excised.
Now, I know what you're thinking. The obvious defense here is just economics, right? Paper costs money, and a pocket Bible obviously has to fit in a pocket. But that defense really falls apart under scrutiny. A publisher could easily have cut genealogies, census lists, or ancient temple measurements to save pages, but instead they chose a highly specific thematic seam:
Cost explains that a cut was made, absolutely, but it does not explain where. An editorial judgment is being made about what the recipient actually needs to read.
Bringing us to Section 5. Paul without Moses, manufacturing an outcome. Because here's the thing, removing the Hebrew scriptures doesn't just shorten the book, it actively corrupts the reading of the books that are actually left, especially the Apostle Paul's letters. Paul was a rabbinically trained interpreter, right? His arguments rely entirely on quoting the Torah. But when the abridged Bible removes that Torah, his complex debates about law and grace look completely different. Without the root text, you are handing a reader a guy arguing with an opponent they cannot hear about a text they literally cannot open.
So what is the stark conclusion here? We are essentially manufacturing Marcion's outcome entirely by accident. Modern distributors certainly don't share that ancient heresy. They profess the full canon. But practically speaking, the artifact they hand to the poor forcefully reproduces Marcion's theology. A person reading only the pocket edition encounters God exactly as Marcion wanted, severed from the law, the land, and the prophets.
This entire analysis leaves publishers and distributors with 3 very clear, actionable requests. First, publish the editorial rationale. Just explain why Proverbs was kept but the Jubilee of Leviticus was dropped. Second, print a plain notice on the first page of abridged editions stating exactly which books are omitted. And third, bring equity to distribution. Give the complete Bible to the sidewalk and the jail at the exact same rate it goes to paid hotel rooms.
We want to leave you with a lingering question today. When we curate the word for the vulnerable, are we offering them the full scope of deliverance or just the portions that demand their good behavior? Think about it. Give a hungry man the Proverbs and you've given him instruction. Give him Leviticus 25 and you have given him a claim. Definitely something to chew on the next time you see a small book handed out on the street.